Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. My name is Amanda. I am the homeschool mom behind Raising A to Z. And not only am I a homeschool mom, I am also a certified teacher here in Ontario, Canada. And I thought today we could talk a little bit about the Ontario curriculum. I've seen recently a lot of people talking about looking for Ontario curriculum, looking for the Ontario grade 2 curriculum, looking for Ontario approved curriculum, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about the Ontario curriculum and how that relates to public school, homeschoolers, and what the word curriculum even means. So today we're going to talk specifically about what curriculum means, what the word curriculum means, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that affects homeschoolers, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually read Ontario curriculum documents in case there's something in here that you want to understand or read and exactly how these work. Let's start by talking about the word curriculum and how it applies in Ontario and in Canada. The Ontario public school system and the government use the word curriculum very differently than the way homeschoolers use the word curriculum. Even some private schools tend to use more of a homeschooler's term. So the Ontario curriculum is essentially a list of expectations that a child should be able to do by the end of their grade. So by the end of grade 2, they have done boom, 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 boom. That's basically how it works. So I think that's important to say that the Ontario documents are that by the end of a grade that children will have been able to check all these things off. That is important because some people read these and feel like their kids are behind because their kids can't do it. You know, they have a child in grade 3, their kid can't do any of the things in grade 3, but they're just starting grade 3. The point of the Ontario curriculum is that it gives you a path and a direction that by the end of grade 3, your child should be able to do it when they finish in June. Another interesting thing to point out about the Ontario provincial curriculum is that there is no direction or guides on how a teacher is to teach this. So for example, there's no set reading lists. So you might have in one school, in grade 6, one of the classes I taught in grade 6, they were reading The Hunger Games. School down the street, their reading list included Hatchet. It's very different from school to school, and that has to do with what sets of class books they've had and been able to purchase, what they have on stock, and what their actual classes are able to do and how they're doing level-wise. So there's very little direction on how they're actually going to teach these expectations. Really, it's up to the teacher to kind of create assignments and activities and lesson plans that are going to guide their students through a process that they, by the end of their grade, will have been able to check all these boxes. That's kind of how the Ontario curriculum works. Another important thing to note about the Ontario curriculum, we tend to do during the school year, we use level 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for report cards, it's kind of converted to a letter grade. So an A would be a level 4, B is a level 3, C is a level 2, and then D is a level 1. It's important to note that if your child can do the expectations outlined in the Ontario curriculum fairly consistently, and they're kind of they can do that, they're not going above and beyond it. If they can do it consistently and fairly well, that's a B. So that often confuses people. They think that if their kid is checking this off, they would be getting an A in school. It's just something to think about, is that if your kids can kind of check the box at the very, basically check the box, that is a B level work. Just so you kind of have a rough idea of where grading goes with all this. That being said, this is how the Ontario government and public schools use Ontario documents. This is what private schools and homeschoolers consider curriculum. Ontario government, homeschoolers. The big difference is that homeschoolers tend to use what schools would call curriculum materials. So the big difference is that a homeschool curriculum is something that will guide you through the process of teaching a subject. So it has often has many of the activities, lessons, assignments, already lined out for you, whereas Ontario government documents are looking for kind of just the finished product. This is telling you how to get there. This is telling you the finished product. So a lot of homeschoolers are going to look at getting different textbooks, reading lists. They might pick up some workbooks like I have here, and they might have a couple for one for each different subject. They might have an all-in-one, but basically they are finding their way to teach their kids a variety of subjects using lesson plans designed by somebody else. That's how homeschoolers, and I've even been in private schools where that is what they mean by curriculum. When they are deciding what their curriculum is, they are picking out what workbook, what textbook, what reading list is going to help their students best, whereas the government documents are explaining what they want the end result to be. So that's the real big difference between how homeschoolers use the word curriculum and how the Ontario government uses the word curriculum. It's important to explain that to a lot of people because people seem to think that they're the same. And how this gets really confusing is that you will not find homeschool curriculum that is approved by the Ontario government, because Ontario, there's no requirement of how this is going to be taught. So you can find Canadian curriculum, which is going to do things like use metric system. They're going to have Canadian money. They might talk about Canadian issues and Canadian history, but they're not specifically Ontario government approved, unless of course you're using like an accredited online homeschool program kind of thing. So that is something we need to start with. It's really important because a lot of people get those two things confused. So another thing I want to talk about before we dive into exactly how to read some of these very confusing documents, why someone might want to follow the Ontario curriculum if they're homeschooling. So let me make this very clear to everyone. You do not need to follow the Ontario curriculum if you are homeschooling. There is no requirement to do so. You are not expected to. You don't have to. Now, there are some people out there who might like to follow it, or they might like to peruse it for their own general interests. So here are some reasons why someone might want to follow the Ontario curriculum. Number one, you might, especially if you're new to homeschooling, you might feel more at ease if you're following kind of a guideline set by someone else. Especially parents who are concerned about not giving their kids like a balanced diet of different subjects. Some people really like to know that. Some parents really like knowing that their kids are at pace with public school kids, or that they are exceeding public school kids. For some parents, that gives them peace of mind. Another reason why someone might want to follow the Ontario curriculum is if they are planning on only homeschooling for a short period of time. For example, if you're only homeschooling for 1 year, it might make sense to stick a little closer to the Ontario curriculum because you don't want your kids to be behind if they're going back relatively quickly. Another popular reason for following the Ontario curriculum is if your children are getting ready to enter the public school system. So if you have kids who are going to high school or middle school or something like that, a lot of parents like to peruse the Ontario curriculum and make sure that their kids are kind of know what will be expected of them once they get into high school. Those are kind of some of the top reasons for why you might want to follow the Ontario curriculum, or at the very least kind of read through what some of the expectations are so you know what's going on. But again, let me state this, you do not need to follow the Ontario curriculum. You are not expected to follow the Ontario curriculum. This is more for general information and if you are generally curious. And just to kind of clarify things. So now that we've said that, let us jump in to how to read these lovely documents. When we're talking about Ontario curriculum, let's talk about how it's organized. So it is organized by subject. So we have like a math. I have printed off here a little bit of a language arts. I have some social studies, science and technology, French as a second language. There's arts, which include music, language, music, visual arts, dance, drama. So there's a curriculum document for each subject. And within that subject document, it goes through by grade. So if you're looking for it online, it gets a little confusing. you would be looking for example, the math curriculum, and it has grades, this one is grades 1 to 8, and then there's a 9 to 12, grades 1 to 8, and inside there's going to be a section that has like a grade 1 section, and then it'll go through all the expectations for math for grade 1. Then it moves on to grade 2 and grade 3 and grade 4 and so on and so forth. We will put a link to the Ontario Ministry website below. You can search by subject and you can search by grade. However, I will tell you, if you click by grade, it is just going to list all of the subject documents and you have to click on them. It does not take you to the subject, the grade specific area in the subject document. It just brings you up a list of subject documents. It's kind of a useless button, but hey, that's what the government did. I didn't make the website. Let's dive into what these things look like. So there is a section at the beginning that is like for teachers, for parents, how they're gonna, there's lots of different information, but let's get specifically into the expectations, because I think that's really what most people are looking at the Ontario documents for, is how to read the expectation section of the document. So let's start with strands. So this is a big word. So all the subjects are broken down into strands, which is kind of like a segmentation of the subject. For example, in the math curriculum, there are 5 strands. Every year, students are going to cover 5 different sections of math. And if you're wondering what those 5 sections are, in math, students study number sense and numeration, measurement, geometry and spatial sense, patterning and algebra, and data management and probability. So those are the 5 topics that students study. They will study all 5 each year, and it just progressively gets more difficult as they go up the grades. So that is the first thing. Strands, and we call them strands. Sometimes they're called topics depending on the subject, and it varies. Each subject has their own thing. That is the first thing. So you're going to look at what the strands are. If you're wondering like how that translates to other subjects, when you're looking at like language arts, you're going to have, I think there's 4. There's written communication, oral communication, reading, and media literacy. So those are the 4 that you cover in language arts. So you study them all throughout the year and every year, but you're specifically kind of growing those are kind of the topics that you're covering, and you're expected to, from grade 1 to grade 8, get better. So once you understand the concept of strands, you're going to get into overall expectations. So looking at, this is the language arts, we're looking at overall expectations. That is the 3 to 5 big ideas that by the end of that grade, students will understand and be able to do at an appropriate level. An example of one of the big ideas would be in the math documents. Grade 1 expectation, overall expectation for geometry would be identifying and knowing 2D and 3D shapes. That would be an overall expectation. So it's kind of the big idea within a strand. So you have your topic, then you have your big expectation, and then they break it down into what we call specific expectations. And specific expectations are actual things that a student should be able to do to prove that they do understand the concept that is the big idea. So again, let's use the 2D, 3D shape identification. So we have our strand would be geometry. Then we're breaking it down into our big idea, which is identifying 2 and 3D shapes. And then some of our our specific expectations are going to be things like can identify shapes in real world objects, can describe shapes such as by their color, their size, they're fat, they're skinny, they're long, they're tall. Those are kind of specific things that a student should be able to do to prove that they can identify and understand 2 and 3D shapes at that grade level. That is kind of how those sections work. So like I said, you have your strand, then you have your strand, you have your overall expectations, and then your specific expectations. I will say that the Ontario government documents do make it look like there is a lot. There is a lot that they expect, but if you read it, it's actually a lot of edu-speak, and it does get a little confusing. So it does look like a lot, but once you get into it and you start to read it, you realize that some of these things are very simple and they're very easily like a check off. kind of situation, they're not something that you really need to do a lot of. Another thing I think we really need to talk about is that the Ontario curriculum is incredibly vague. Part of this is because teachers are allowed to teach it how they see fit for their students, for the kids that they have in their class, for the resources they have, for the booklet, the materials that they have. They're kind of allowing teachers to use their professional judgment to determine that a child has in fact reached the level B, which is kind of the goal, is that we would like all Ontario students to be at a level B or level 3. So, but that being said, as a non-educator, if you were to read these, they seem very vague and a little bit confusing. Let me show you how. If we are looking at the Ontario language document, I'm going to show you some of the expectations for grade 1 writing. So grade 1 writing expectation number 1 is that by the end of grade 1, students will generate, gather, and organize ideas and information to write for an intended purpose and audience. Okay, that's the overall expectation. If you were to go to another grade, say grade 6, the grade 6 overall writing expectations are, one of them is by the end of grade 6, students will generate, gather, and organize ideas and information to write for an intended purpose and audience. So if you think those sound similar, they do. It's because they're exactly the same. It's because the overall expectations for some, especially for some subjects, don't really change that much. It's just that they expect the students to grow their ability to do that. So for example, in grade 1, for the concept of organizing ideas, students should be able to identify and order main ideas and supporting details, initially with support and direction using simple graphic organizers or simple organizational patterns. So for example, in grade 1, students should be able to say that, this happened first, then this, then this. Kind of give a timeline of what happened, a rough timeline, using pictures and assistance. In grade 6, they should be able to identify and order main ideas, supporting details, and group them into units to develop and structure multi-paragraph pieces. So it's the same idea, it's just asking them to do it at a much more advanced ability. These are a little bit vague, but basically the reason being is that you as a teacher in the Ontario public school system are given the freedom to find activities and lessons and assignments that would allow your specific students to prove these different expectations. So it's not so much about being able to check a box, it's about being able to do these things at a successful level for your grade. So that's important. When it comes to strands and topics, sometimes there are very set topics and sometimes there are not. So for example, in the science curriculum, science and technology curriculum for Ontario, they actually have a list of what topics are to be taught in each grade. And they do 4 strands. So for example, let's pick a grade, grade 4. They're gonna do habitats and communities, they're gonna do pulleys and gears, they're gonna do light and sound, and they're gonna do rocks and minerals. Those are the 4 things that they are gonna study. Every grade 4 class in Ontario are going to study those 4 strands. That's set, right? So that's how it works. But sometimes you'll go over to something like your social studies curriculum, where you have a little bit more wiggle room. So for example, in social studies, you have 2 strands, heritage and identity, and people and environments. Obviously in grades 7 and 8, you have history and geography. That makes it really easy. But in grade 4, to give you an example, you're studying early societies to 1500 Common Era. There are a lot of early societies up until 1500 Common Era. So you might, for example, have one teacher in the school down the street that is studying medieval times. You might have another teacher over across town that is doing ancient Egypt. You might have another teacher who, down all the way in Toronto is doing the Vikings. Like, there are so many options there. So, when it comes to things like that, sometimes it's really up to the teachers on how they're going to teach that and what they're going to teach. But that could be, sometimes these are really interesting topic lists of like, oh, early societies. I might not have thought of that. So that is how this document works. I'm hoping this is not too confusing. Reading Ontario government documents can be very confusing, but I'm hoping that this was kind of a way to simplify and break it down for you, that if you were picking up one of these books, you would be able to kind of look through it and understand what you're reading, where it's coming from, and what the point of it is. So like I said, we are looking at kids being able to complete these things by the end of a specific grade. The expectations are simple things like, can a kid do this? Yes, check it off. Sometimes it's an assignment, sometimes it's a series of lessons, sometimes it's a lecture, sometimes it's a conversation. There's a lot of ways to prove that students know these things, and that's really up to the teacher. So these documents are really just a guide. They're a guide of how to get where students should be in June, and hopefully that when they start up in September in the next grade, they have that base knowledge to then continue to the next level. But again, like we said, if you are a homeschooler, which we are, you don't have to follow the Ontario curriculum. Like I said, there are people who might want to, but you are under no obligation to do that. I hope that this was a good overview of how to use the Ontario curriculum and the difference between the Ontario curriculum and your homeschool type curriculum. I hope that you understand that they are not the same thing, and that if you're using them with a teacher, they're going to be very confused, and if the teacher's using curriculum word with you, you will both be very confused. But I'm also hoping that this will help people understand that when they're looking for grade 2 Ontario curriculum for homeschoolers, you're not going to find it, because it doesn't actually exist. Because so much of what your public school teachers are doing is using guidelines to make assignments and activities to fit their students that are sitting in front of them, using the textbooks, materials, book lists, and resources that they have in their specific school, and those vary greatly across the board. So one school might have Nelson textbooks, another school might be using Pearson. They kind of fit at the end, but those are what they're using. One school, like I said, might have Hatchet as a class set. Another school might be using the Hunger Games. If you are diving into these Ontario curriculum documents and you really want some more information, we are here to help. We have created an awesome PDF printable that is full of glossary terms of some of the thick words and edu-speak that you will find in Ontario curriculum documents. Hopefully this will help you navigate these government documents so that you actually understand them a little bit better, and that you can make decisions for your family and your homeschooling. And we will have a link down below where you can download that for free. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you find this educational and helpful for you, and maybe you like some of the other videos we've put out recently, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell to get notifications. We put out new videos every Monday morning at 7 a.m. And make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where we post videos and do chats and stuff like that pretty much every day. Feel free to drop us a DM in any one of those platforms, and we will happily get back to you. So thank you so much, and we will see you guys on next Monday. Bye.